Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free tutorial here today on YouTube, I'm going to show you how to turn a pair of bamboo chopsticks into decorative hair sticks. Let's head down to the board and we'll take a closer look at today's project. Now I've created one already, which I've used red and white and a little bit of tiger's eye there, colourway, to create something that I think is really lovely. Now obviously you don't have to use chain, you can use whatever medium you like to hang from the hair stick, but the technique that I want to share with you today is how to take a standard bamboo chopstick and create an attachment point at the top, and I will take you through a couple of ways that you can add onto that design. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is to pop a hole near the end of your bamboo chopstick so that you can create an attachment point with a lovely heavy wire. The first thing I'm going to do today is to just pop a little hole in. Now I am not an expert with power drills, which is why I'm going to be using hand machines today. So I've got a little punch first of all, which we're going to just pop a little mark in at the point at which I want the hole to appear. So just hold that nice and steady, and then we're going to push that down so we get a nice dimple in the wood into which our drill bit can sit. Now you could use a bow drill, which I have in the cupboard, or you could use one of these, which is like a pump up and down drill, or if you're better than I am with power drills, you could absolutely use a power drill. So just support that in position. This one's got a collar that you can grip to make sure that it doesn't wiggle around too much. And then I'm just going to push that up and down until it gets started and biting into the hole that we've made. Now it can take a little bit of time, but as long as you just have a bit of patience, or if you're not happy with power drills like I'm not, you could ask a friend to assist you, or if you are, then good for you. I consider myself a little bit dangerous with power tools, so I tend to use hand tools for the most part. And you can see that we're making good headway, so it's just a case of keep going. You could, of course, also get chopsticks that have ridges in, or if you wanted to use metal chopsticks, then you can use the ones with ridges in to give your wire something to purchase onto. But today I'm going to go for these really pretty bamboo chopsticks. Now you can see that's gone all the way through. So what I'm going to do is just flip it over and drill in from the other side to make sure that we get a nice finish on both sides. If it does flake a bit, you can always sand that down. That has flaked ever so slightly, but I'm not going to worry about it. So let's just make sure that that's nice and firm in the vise. Doesn't take much to come through from the other side, and then just pull that back out. And I've probably got some sandpaper over in the cupboard that will help, and I'll just rub away above where that beautiful pattern is and just try to get that nice and smooth before we move on to the next stage of today's tutorial. So we have our drilled chopstick. And honestly, I just used the drill bit that was in the drill. So it looks to be about a 2mm drill bit that has been used, which means that we can use this 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire really easily without any dramas at all. So I've cut a 7-inch length, and I'm going to make a bend in that probably about 2/3 of the way along. Get a nice sharp bend in there to begin with, as sharp as you can get on a cold day like today. Just smooth and warm the shorter end of wire through. Make sure that's as toasty as you can get it. Now I'm using a heavier wire today simply because I want these hair sticks to last for ages and ages. So let's use a nice heavy wire. Not so heavy that it will be a stress on the wood though. So we've got a straight line coming up on one side and a straight out to the side on the other. So I'm just going to warm through on both halves of this now. And then I'm going to grab my bent chain nose pliers. And I'm going to bring the side of the wire up like so that that sits really neatly either side of the aperture. Now the shorter end of wire is just going to sit still for a second. I'll bring the longer tail over to begin with. What I need to do is take the longer tail away from as central a point as I possibly can muster, up at the back end of that hair stick. Still a bamboo chopstick at this stage, but we'll work it out. So let's just get that as straight as we can coming out the top of the chopstick. And you can see that's slightly on the wonk, so I'm just going to straighten that up. So take your time with this. What we don't want to do is to splinter the wood. When I drilled the aperture in one of these chopsticks, it slightly scuffed a little bit because I misaligned with my centre punch. So just take your time, and at the end of the day, each of these chopsticks is 50p, so I'm not overly worried if it's imperfect, just a little bit. I'm going to take the tail back over in the opposite direction so that those two wires are going to meet in the middle. Now, if I grip the shorter tail of wire at the point it crosses behind the longer tail and just support that whilst I bring the wire over the top, it means that I can get a really nice circular wrap going on the upright just here. Now, I think I've actually accidentally picked up some 1.5mm 14 gauge wire because it's being very uncooperative. The other one was a little easy to work with, and as you can imagine, I have lots of scraps of wire around the place and some of them go unlabelled. So this is a very heavy wire I'm working with today, and my fingers don't enjoy the cold weather. So I'm going to give that a rub through to generate some heat and warmth into the project, and in that way we will get a slightly nicer, smoother wrap around that core wire. And what I'm going to do here is to wrap 3 times, and I'm just moving very, very slowly because I don't want to pull too tightly across the drill aperture in this bamboo wood. Structurally, it's really nice and sound, but I don't want to risk mashing it slightly. So once I've trimmed that wire away, I'm going to push it down so that it sits as close as possible around that core wire, and that it's nice and neat and tidy. Now, we will be covering this over, so if it's a little bit loosey-goosey, don't worry overly, but I'm going to try and get that as straight and neat as I can before we move on to the next stage of today's project. So do just take your time to make sure that you're not putting too much stress across that drill hole in the bamboo chopstick, and also to make sure that you're happy with how smooth and taut that little spiral of wire is on the core that's coming away directly from the bamboo chopstick. So once everything is nice and smooth in that spiral, and I have marked the wire slightly just because I want to get a really good solid core just here. I'm not overly worried about it because I'm going to add a second layer of wire over the top in just a moment. So what I'm going to do is make sure that the remaining wire coming away from the end of that chopstick is nice and smooth and warm. And I'm going to bring that tail of wire away at about 45 degrees. Now, rather than leaving a gap into which I'm going to add wraps of wire, I've brought the angle away directly at the top of that little spiral, because once I've turned a loop and added in all of my decorative items, I'm going to wrap over the top of this little column of wire wraps. I'm going to create a small loop up at the end here, and I think I'll use the 2mm side of my memory wire finishing pliers. You could make a larger loop if you prefer, and I'm just going to draw that all the way around and back across, and I've left that a little bit open, so there's a big gap up the middle. We're just going to put that away for one moment, and I want to show you the piece that I made to demonstrate with today. So this has got 2 differently lengthed pieces of chain, and they're coming away random lengths from that connection point. So it's 2 pieces of chain that I've joined mid-length into the loop at the end of the chopstick, and on either end of those 2 lengths of chain, and the lengths of chain I've used are around about 4 or 5 inches in length, but you could use ribbon, you could use macrame or macrame if you prefer, whatever you fancy to add on to that chain. I'm going to show you some examples in a moment, but I just wanted to walk through what we've got here, which is a couple of bead pairs, and they're cascading up, joined on opposite sides of a piece of chain. And then I've got some column beads and round beads with macrame leaves on the end, and a small piece of macrame just outside the chain connection point. And then I've just got some random beads with more of those macrame leaves. And then I've got a wire work leaf. Now, if you want to see how to make something like that, I have a dedicated video which you can find just here to see how to make one of those if you wish. So let's just pop this up to the side of the board for now. And then we will come back to our piece just here. So before I complete that, what I'm going to do is to make another 2 chains with decorative items on either end. And I'll just share one of them with you, and then in a couple of moments I'll make a second one. So to add a little cascade, what I've got is some head pins, and I've got dyed green tiger's eye, which I got in a beautiful bead scoop from Fleur at Relax and Craft. And what we're going to do is just to create a round form. I've just turned a right angle already, and the reason I've done that off screen is because it would all roll away. I don't know what I've done with my little dish that I normally use, so everything would roll off if I didn't put that angle change in. Nothing secretive or mysterious. All I did was I put the end of my pliers through, turned the head pin away at a right angle, and then I'm going to use the small side of those memory wire finishing pliers. You could use bail makers or you could use rounder nose pliers to create a round loop form that's quite open. And I'm going to add one onto the very end of my chain. You can just close that up by hand. So once that's nice and closed up, we're just going to generate a wrapped loop. You've probably seen a wrapped loop with me at least 100 times. So all I'm going to do is to draw that wire all the way around the core that then travels through the bead. The slower you go, the neater your wraps on a wrapped loop will be, especially if you're working with head pins, which tend to be a slightly harder temper of wire than the standard wire which I buy on a reel. So once I've got 3 turns of wire, it could be 2 turns, it depends how big the gap was between the bead and the angle change, I'm just going to make sure that the cut end is tucked neatly away. Because this can be worn next to hair, I don't want anything to be sticking out to catch. So I've also gone for disc head pins, which will sit flush against the bead. So all I will do then is repeat that twice, but one on one side of the chain and one on the other, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in a second. I'm just going to make a couple of small open loops at the top, and then what I will do is I will lay the chain down flat on the board, and I will look at where I want to add in the next connection point. So what I'll probably do in actual fact is add one to the right in the next loop that's in the same orientation. So the bottom loop is currently facing flat to the board, then there's a loop at 90 degrees, and then loop number 3 on that chain is sitting flat again. So I will add my next head pin into the right hand side of that chain. So I'm not going to go through the process of making a wrapped loop again, I just want to show you how to build a little cascade. So we've got that chain moving on up the board. I've added my first bead right down at the bottom in the middle. The second bead is on loop or link number 3 on the right hand side. So the next one I'm going to add in will be on the left hand side on link number 5. So just take your time and you will be able to see exactly where you need to add that in, and then repeat the adding a wrapped loop. And what you build up to is a nice little cascade of beads. So I'll finish that off and join you back in just a moment. So I've just got a piece left over from a tutorial I've just crafted for Jessie James Beads. Keep an eye out for that on the Jessie James Beads channel. And I'm going to add this onto my little cascade with those beautiful green tiger's eye, because I think that will look lovely. But what you can obviously do if you want, if you've got a number of the same sort of beads, is you can just alternate from one side to the next. And it builds up in this lovely cascade drop design. So let's just have a look at what we've got so far. One to the left, one to the right. So the next one I would need to add into is just here. So again, I will follow the same protocol. I will just make a wrapped loop and add it into the opposite side so that that will be another feature. So whilst I set out very definitively today to create a decorative hair stick design for this tutorial, what I found is that it's going to be a really useful way to use up odds and ends. So beads maybe where you only have 1 or 2 left, pieces of chain that are only a couple of inches in length, odd segments of wire. Now there's no reason to say that you have to be completely cohesive with colours, like I did with the one that's red and white, you can absolutely go to town, or you can collect beads and bits of wire and chain in separate areas until you have enough to make a cohesive piece. Let's head back down to the board and we'll move on to the next stage of today's tutorial. So you can make the decorative hair stick as simple or as clustered with designs as you desire. So what I've done is I've generated a slightly more simple look here with a single bead and accent on either end. And then for the other chain, I've got multiple beads with all sorts of different design aesthetics. So in order to get them to sit into the design, what I'm going to do is just lay down the bits of chain and have them sit approximately how I imagine they will finish up. So at this stage you can decide how high and how low you want the design to look. I kind of think that looks cool with some very much longer pieces and then some shorter ones. So that gives you an idea of what part of the chain you're going to want to thread in to that loop we made at the end of the bamboo chopstick. So just thread those all the way in. They need to go all the way around so that they sit in the middle. And before you commit that to the finished wrapping of the wire, just sit that down, and when it hangs it will look like this. So that's obviously a very busy one and slightly shorter in length than the display piece. Once you're happy with how everything is coming together, what we're going to do is close up this loop. Give that a bit of a push by hand, preferably so that it sits neatly into position. We'll grip across that round form, taking care not to smush down any of the chains and also to not press down where the wires cross over. Now, I mentioned that I think I've picked up a 1.5mm 14 gauge instead of the 1.25 16 gauge which I had intended to use, but it's all good, it will just last even longer. So I'm going to wrap that over the top of the first wraps that we did. And I think there will be about 3 wraps going all together. What I'm going to do is to bring the tail of wire to the face of the chopstick, away from where the holes are. And I'm just going to make sure that that end is flush cut. Grab in any round form to start generating a small spiral. So I'm going to use my memory wire finishing pliers just to start turning that wire around. Get best part of a circle going and then switch over to your flat facing pliers so that you can complete that spiral. Now, if you prefer a cleaner look, you can simply cut the wire away where it leaves that second spiral. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that spiral all the way down and just pop it over the surface of the chopstick. And that will keep everything from slipping down on both sides. So you may need to just give that a bit of a squish to get it to sit exactly how you want it to. And you can of course add further wraps if you wish. You could cover the whole thing with ribbon. So that is your decorative hair stick made from a bamboo chopstick and some odds and ends of beads and bits of wire and the odd head pin and the such, just to bring something together really out of nothing and leftovers. Unfortunately, due to autoimmune disorders, I have very thin, fine, brittle hair, so I'm not the best model for this, but I absolutely love how you can turn a couple of very inexpensive chopsticks and some random bits and bobs from your workbench into a decorative hair stick. I hope that you've enjoyed today's tutorial and continue to enjoy the tutorials provided free of charge here on YouTube on the Gemhawks YouTube channel. You can absolutely help me out by liking the videos that I give to you, leaving a comment asking for future videos to be made. Subscribing to the channel is also very, very helpful, as is hyping the videos when they first come out. Have yourself a beautiful day and thanks so much for watching with me here at the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.